I've been collecting Pokemon cards for a while, though it seems there's a huge shift happening right now. Though before I actually reveal what's happening, in today's video, I'm gifting a subscriber this awesome Charizard VMAX promo from the Charizard UPC. Now, if I reply to your comment with this Charmander emoji, then the VMAX promo is coming your way. And hey, if you are new to the channel, I'd just like to say welcome aboard. My name's Phil and I cover topics relating to the Pokemon TCG market. Feel free to subscribe for consistent Pokemon TCG content. However, as I was saying, there's a bit of an uncomfortable truth that's happening right now, and it's kind of coming out throughout 2025 within Pokemon investing. And I think there's some serious discussions on whether or not singles are even considered a smart play with how volatile they've been behaving. Because it seems sealed products are just proving to be that much more stable within the market. However, when singles start behaving like this, it kind of makes everyone's eyes turn to sealed. In fact, what you'll see is that singles can start dipping, but sealed just begins climbing very slowly. And I think 2025 has highlighted how volatile singles are in comparison to sealed. And I think singles are never really meant to be considered investments, especially when we reference the data points. I mean, check this out. So this thing, when talking about sealed and singles, really interesting things are happening at the moment. So right now I'm on the Charizard from Pokemon 151. So you can see the way the Charizard's been performing is really volatile. So check this out. You can see in the last 6 months, this card was selling for $234 US, went all the way to $290. And right now, the Charizard from 151 is selling for $182. So you can see a pretty big chunk of value has come off this card. Now, this is where it gets really interesting because all the singles of 151 are slowly coming down in price. You know, that's a fair bit that's come off the Charizard. Same thing when we're looking at the Blastoise, all right? You can see the Blastoise selling for 88 US, right now selling for $60. When you look at the percentage decrease of that, that's pretty significant, okay? So you can see that the Charizard and the Blastoise are both coming down in value. They're both having a very strong reduction in price. And this is what needs to be understood. You can see that the singles are coming down in price. Same thing when we look at the Alakazam. The Alakazam in February was selling for 57 US. Right now selling for $35. Now, sure, it's not the most desired card from Pokemon 151, but we do know that Pokemon 151 does have more generous pull rates than other sets. These aren't the easiest cards to pull. It's not like Obsidian Flames, but it definitely is more challenging than a lot of other sets. So here is where it gets really interesting, and it's something we all need to look into. Like I said, a lot of the 151 singles are slowly trickling down in price, but when we look at the sealed product, check this out. Here I'm on the Pokemon 151 ETB, and you can clearly see on that snapshot of the year graph just how much it's risen in the last year. If we pull this into the last 3 months, which I was just looking at for those singles of 151, all the singles I was just showing you in the last 3 months have slowly been coming down in price. But look at that. Pokemon 151's ETB is slowly coming up very steadily. You can see selling for $206 in April, right now selling for $242. Not a wild price increase, but you can see the sealed product is slowly coming up, even though the singles are coming down. That's a real key that you kind of need to understand if you're investing and collecting in collectibles, okay? Pokemon cards behave interesting. You can see sealed just has a way of holding in the market even when the singles are coming down. Same thing when we look at the Crown Zenith ETB. In the last 3 months, you can see the Crown Zenith ETB was selling for 136 US, right now selling for 175 US. That's a fairly big price increase, right? But you got to remember, you can see in the last 3 months, Crown Zenith ETBs are now coming up. But what about when we look at the chase cards of Crown Zenith? Now, moving on to the Giratina VSTAR from Crown Zenith, you can definitely see that it's also having a bit of a price reduction, even though Crown Zenith ETBs are coming up in price. This is really important, right? You can see Crown Zenith ETBs are rising in price, the top chase cards are coming down. So you can see it doesn't have any rhyme or reason. Giratina V-Star selling for $214 in January of this year. Though check this out, slowly coming down in price, right now selling for $152 US. So you can see the Giratina V-Star has really come down in price. And that's really interesting, right? Because this is the top chase card or the most desired card from Crown Zenith. And right now, I've got to say that is looking at a good price point considering how expensive the sealed product of Crown Zenith is becoming. Check out the Arceus V-Star. Arceus V-Star was selling for $136 in January, right now selling for $88. So you can see right there, that's a really interesting reference point of what's happening at the moment. Now for some really exciting news, I've actually teamed up with Collector and we are both giving away this PSA 10 Arceus V-Star from Crown Zenith. Enter now on my channel's Discord, which is in the video's description. Now today's video is proudly sponsored by the Collector app. Now the Collector app is an incredible app which tracks and manages your collectible portfolio. Now one of the best parts is that Collector actually updates pricing in real time based on recently sold prices, so you always have accurate market values for your sealed product and your cards. Now Collector has recently introduced a set analytics feature which lets you really dive deep into a set. So for example, here I'm looking at Pokemon 151 and you can see the market movers within the set, and you can even see that it provides a volatility score. Now if you do have Collector Pro, you can actually scan a card and it will automatically detect what it is and add it to your collection within Collector. A huge thank you to Collector for sponsoring the PSA 10 Arceus giveaway, which you can enter on my Discord, and you can find all the details about Collector within the video's description. Really weird behavior at the moment, and I think this is a very interesting time for the hobby, but more so if you're collecting or investing in collectibles, you really need to look at this, because when you're looking at singles, they just behave how they want to behave. Though sealed has some stability that we don't see in any other areas of Pokemon cards, okay? The only time sealed really starts coming down in price is if there's a huge amount of reprints, kind of like what's happening with Prismatic Evolutions, and you can see that the price gets drawn down. When we're looking at this though, this is really interesting, and not only is it interesting, but it's important to understand. If you are buying singles and you're really emotionally attached to the price point, you're always gonna be disappointed, or you're always gonna be in a state of like fight or flight because you're like, oh, what's going on, right? Sealed doesn't really have that, but I also gotta be real with you. I personally love collecting cards, okay? To me, I love my singles. It's not that I don't mind sealed, okay? But the problem with me is if I've got like cases of product, okay, I sometimes feel like I just don't wanna be living with like big pieces of cardboard, you know, in a case. To me, that kind of, it takes away the fun of collecting, because I've been collecting as a kid, right? And ever since I collected as a kid, to me, I love the artwork. So I've got such a deep appreciation for the artworks. Also love showing off some of the slabs or cards, right? To me, when you flick through a binder or show off some slabs, that's the heart of collecting for me. That's my perspective, okay? So even though I know sealed is a better purchase when I look at all the data points and I look how they behave, you know, historical performances, I still love my singles. And that's why if you do buy singles, you really do have to have a lot of love for what you purchase, because if you don't, you're always going to be disappointed. And like I said, you're just going to be in this fight or flight mode because you're going to be like, oh, they're coming down in price. Oh, my singles, oh, everything's gone down. And that's why I always say, buy what you love, dude. Because if you're not buying cards that you genuinely want in your collection, you're just always going to be left disappointed. Same thing here when we're looking at the Fusion Strike booster boxes, right? This is really interesting. In the last 3 months, check this out. Fusion Strike booster boxes in April this year was selling for $475 US. You can see right now selling for $742. That is a huge price increase, man. So you can see that the Fusion Strike booster boxes have just ballooned up in price. Though here's the interesting thing. What about the top chase cards of Fusion Strike? When I'm looking at the Gengar VMAX alternate art from Fusion Strike, you can see that this card was selling in February for $744 US. So you can see that this chase card was much more expensive than the sealed booster box. But look at this, right now the Gengar VMAX has fallen down to $585 US. Now here's the thing, this card is so difficult to pull. It is very unlikely if you open a booster box of Fusion Strike that you're gonna pull this Gengar. And right now there's literally no point to open a Fusion Strike booster box, because even if you were lucky enough to hit the top chase card, you effectively still would have lost money. And that's the wild thing, right? So you can see how sealed behaves. Even when the chase cards in the set start coming down, sealed can still go up. It's very interesting. Same thing with Espeon VMAX from Fusion Strike. You can see selling for $326 US, right now selling for $296. Not as big as a price reduction as the Gengar, but you can see just how the market is behaving. Now, one that's really interesting for me is Chilling Reign, right? Because Chilling Reign is quite an old set now. It came out in 2021. Now, it's getting pretty old, okay? So it's not like nowhere near a vintage set in any way, but you know, Chilling Reign Rain definitely is becoming a more aged set. But you know, within the next 6 months to a year, I think Chilling Rain's gonna lose its tag of being a modern set. But of course, you can see, check this out, in the last 6 months, selling for $304 US in February, right? And you can see Chilling Rain went all the way up to $414. So you can see it also has gone up in price. But when you look at the top chase card of Chilling Rain, which is the Blaziken VMAX, check this out. Now here I'm on the Blaziken VMAX, and you can see in the last 3 months, it's slowly gone down in price. You can see selling for $382 in April, right now selling for $359 US. Now, it's not a huge price reduction, but you can see how it's working. The sealed slowly goes up or holds in the market, while the top chase card just goes down. So you can see singles, you never know how they're going to perform. And that's why you kind of have to really look at what's happening here. I'm not saying don't buy singles, because I love buying singles, but I also got to tell you, if you do buy singles, you really need to kind of distance yourself emotionally and purchase what you love. And here, I'm going to be real with you, all the cards in my collection, if I ever buy a single, I have to love the card. If I just buy a single because I think it's going to balloon in price, I'll always be left disappointed. You know, a few years ago, I used to do that, but I reckon this card's going to go up in price, so I'm just going to buy a few of them because, you know, it's going to be a good investment. But here's the interesting thing about sealed. If all the top chase cards just started ballooning up in price, you know what would happen? Sealed would also start ballooning in price. So it's kind of like a win-win scenario, because even if the singles start coming down, sealed still has that stability. But if all the singles start ballooning up in price, then the sealed also rises. So it's a really interesting thing going on. And I think a lot of people who are investing in collectibles and purchasing them are kind of realizing what's going on. And like I said, man, with singles, you kind of do want to have a bit more of a personal connection to the cards. Otherwise, you're just going to always be disappointed, especially if you're always looking at the prices for your singles. You're always going to be like, oh, I really want it to rise. Oh, am I losing money on my collection? So that's why you kind of have to make these decisions before you purchase. Now, I think the market has really shifted recently. And like I said, collectors are now questioning things, and Pokemon may go through a bit of a transitional period. Like, you know, it's very funny what time can do to change the perception of certain cards in certain eras. For example, if we look at Pokemon in terms of the Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee games, when those games released, they were super disliked, and people complained that they were way too simple. However, as time has gone on, it seems people's opinions have changed, though there was one reason why this shift took place, and you can learn about that within this video on screen right here. Within this video on screen, I go over the Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee games and explain what actually made them become so liked after a long period of time. If you enjoyed this video, click the video that's currently appearing on screen, and I'll see you on my second channel called Philip's Trick Room. I'll see you there.